Hey there, what's up, everybody? Hey, just another one of these really quick talks with you. So, I know that some of those of you who watch this channel also read my blog. I know that some of you probably don't. This is always a tricky thing, right? Because you want to appeal to people who are interested in reading things, and also some of these stories would be interested to people who maybe might not be that interested in reading things. I don't know what your habits are like necessarily when it comes to YouTube watching and blog reading. I know that for me, I like to read things from time to time, especially if they're really gripping articles. But sometimes when I'm doing something else, I like to listen to somebody who talks, who may use the YouTube account sort of like, a podcast, but also maybe with something visual I can look at from time to time. Usually it's, if I'm writing something or if I'm playing a game, like not on camera, or if I'm doing something like that, I want something else going on in the background so that it's not just me thinking about the crazy thoughts in my head and whatever else it is. At any rate, I'm trying my hardest to make sure that some of the content that I think is really good that shows up on the blog also can show up here in YouTube, not just because, I want to advertise the blog. I mean, I obviously do. I want more people to read it, but also because I want to sort of cater to those of you who might not be so interested in spending all the time reading this. A couple days ago, I had a little one of my kind of biographies, not a full proper biography, but sort of a hunt through the newspapers for Harry Pattee. Harry Pattee is probably a player you've never heard of unless you played with 1908, especially with the 1908 Brooklyn team, because the Superbas that year used Harry Pattee as their starting second baseman. It was Harry's only tenure in Major League Baseball, and so he has developed into one of these, not quite like Moonlight Graham type figures, but one of these guys who had like half a season and who looked kind of okay, but had some problems with his game and then just disappeared and were never heard of again. Now, for a lot of us, when we play with seasons like 1908, we'll see guys like Harry Pattee, and we'll think, so what happened here? Why did they give this guy who played so poorly this much of a chance? And then you sort of assume that, naturally they figured that this guy who hit like 214 or whatever really wasn't that good after all and is not really a major league caliber player, and that's the reason why he got his cup of coffee and left. That's not always the case. Right. And this is one of the things that, one of the reasons why it really pays to spend some time looking into the old newspapers and reading what people actually said, right? Harry Pattee is actually a really, really fascinating player with a really interesting history. I'm not going to go too deep into this, at least in this video, his time at Brown University and the worries about professionalism on that team and some of these other things that we do still see in collegiate sports from time to time. Instead, I want to talk about Harry Pattee, the major leaguer, and what happened to him afterwards, right? So when he came up in the major leagues, he came up largely because of his speed. We know he was fast. He played on the Harrisburg team the year before in whatever Pennsylvania league they were in 1907, stole over 60 bases. He had actually been signed by Brooklyn in 1906, but he was a student still at Brown University. He'd been playing in the summer. He told Brooklyn, hey, wait till the summer to call me up. And then when the summer came along, he came up with a bunch of excuses so that he wouldn't have to go to Brooklyn. We're going to see why here in a second. One of the reasons why is that he was studying law as an undergraduate, wanted to graduate. I mean, this is 1906, right? So it's kind of a different sort of college feeling then than it is today. But I think that there are other reasons too why he didn't necessarily want to go to Brooklyn. The Superbas kept trying to call him up in 1906 to no avail. He just wouldn't come. And so I know you look at like the reserve clause era, which is what 1906 was, and you think, oh, well, the owners had all of the leeway. That's not true. Players could just completely refuse to come. A lot of people didn't want to play for Brooklyn. Again, look at the blog and you can see the articles that are talking about this. And so for 1907, that's how he wound up on Harrisburg. Technically, Brooklyn blacklisted him, but that doesn't do you any good because now you just have a player on a blacklist. You can't get any money for them. They needed money. They sold him over to Harrisburg for about, $1,200 or something like that, and they used a bit of it too to sort of buy out his contract. And he went over there for the year and then somehow winds up back in Brooklyn for 1908. Now, in spring training in 1908, where Harry Pattee actually showed up, he started to impress people a lot. He was a good fielding second baseman. That shows up in his 1908 statistics. When you look at it, he's not the best second baseman in the major leagues. That'd be Napoleon Lajoie, absolutely with Cleveland. But he's probably among the best starters, like standard players, in terms of fielding percentage, he's up there. And in terms of range factor, he's up there. And that's because of that speed that he has at second base. You can see that just by glancing at the statistics. Yeah, this guy kind of really is what it was about. The problem that he had is he didn't have much of an offensive game, but nobody in the 1908 National League had a great offensive game. He ended up with 24 stolen bases in what was essentially half a season, which really isn't that bad. I really think that this guy, if he was a little bit younger, probably could have developed, maybe not, he didn't have, you can see in the stories about him, this guy didn't quite have the grit and the desire and the determination of a Ty Cobb, right? But you think that given his speed, Pattee probably could have done a couple of things here or there if he had the chance to do so. The Brooklyn newspapers kind of praise him, especially when you start getting into the papers in June. They talk about his great fielding exploits and so on and so forth. But then something really sad happened. And so for this, we're going to go take a quick look over here at the screen. And here I am blocking the way. So this is the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. This is for June 30th, 1908. This is on page 20. I love how it says page 20. If you want to be certain, here's the other part of this. So this is all torn down in the middle, unfortunately. This is not newspapers.com that does the tearing. This is just how the microfilm was originally pictured, whenever this was originally pictured. I have no idea what year this was done. I don't think this was done in 1908, but I might be wrong. Maybe it was. My guess is that this was all probably done in the 50s at some time. Just so you have your proof, here is the first page of it, 3 cents, Brooklyn Daily Eagle, Tuesday, June 30th, 1908, volume 69, number 181. Beautiful stuff. We'll go back here to number 20. And yes, there are photos in this. You can go back and look at it. So here the Brooklyn team beat the New York Giants. You can probably read about this in the Unforgettable Season. What you won't read about is Harry Pattee. Pattee out for a while. It says Harry Pattee is out of the game for a while, owing to an unusual eruption of the BRT Mount Pele last Saturday. I think I'm reading this right, Pele. In the first game of that afternoon, a cinder found Pattee's eye and bothered him a great deal, although he insisted in finishing the doubleheader. That night, the optic became inflamed to such a great extent that Harry was forced to have it treated. He was told that he would be several days before he could use the eye again. You're probably wondering, what does this refer to? Right? So this is one of these things that we don't realize when we talk about the good old days of baseball, and we imagine the old wooden ballparks and what the smell would have been like, and all of the games were played in the day. And back then, it's 1908. There's a lot of bunting. There's a lot of strategy. There's a lot of hit and run. Pitchers know how to pitch. There's a lot of spitballs. There's a lot of other trick pitches. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. But if you're playing in Brooklyn, there are also factories right behind the outfield wall, and those factories created this rancid smell all through Washington Park that was absolutely putrid and awful. And unfortunately, there were occasionally explosions at factories, and that apparently is what happened here. And little particles of cinder and soot and stuff got into Harry Pattee's eye. So here you have this rookie who's playing well enough to be your full-time second baseman, and he is then out of action because he got cinder in his eye from an explosion at the factory across the street. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is just crazy, right? We forget about this when we talk about the good old days. And, of course, this compelled manager Patsy Donovan to make a big shift in the lineup. And so he puts John Hummel in at second base, which is an absolute catastrophe, as you can imagine. And Brooklyn, wasn't exactly doing so well that season anyway. I don't know if we have the standings here or not. Yeah, here we go. The National League, Brooklyn's in last place at 22-38. I'm not surprised, having played with them in Skeetersoft. But yeah, not exactly the best season. But check this out. The eruptions of Mount Pele are becoming quite strenuous again and are causing no little discomfort at Washington Park these days. But this is not the worst. Across the way in the old ballpark is a stone crusher doing business with a will, and nearby on the canal, an incinerator is quite as active. With all three working overtime, it takes a mighty good ball game like that of yesterday to make the fans forget about these disagreeable surroundings. So, let's talk about this, right? You talk about, jet airplanes taking off and landing at, over Shea Stadium, right? That's pretty bad. That's not as bad as having a freaking incinerator and having a stone crusher and having like a factory that keeps exploding right across, from your outfield. I mean, that's insane. Who wants to go watch a game there? No wonder the attendance was so bad at Brooklyn games in Washington Park. Oh man, it was just absolutely awful. And just like I said as well, there are other websites and other places where you can find sources about the horrible smell that permeated these games. And when we continue here, President Ebbets has appealed to the Board of Health and has threatened to take his ball team elsewhere in the borough if better arrangements are not made. Okay, so yeah, you can go somewhere else in Brooklyn. Or he says he has a nice lot in view somewhere on the line of the Pennsylvania Road on Long Island for a ballpark. Yeah, you imagine that, the Brooklyn Dodgers moving over to Long Island, right? So the final part of this is that, don't blame Walter O'Malley. Ebbets Field was a great success for Mr. Ebbets. But he was pretty frustrated with this stuff too, and I don't blame him. The Brooklyn team needed to get out of that park and needed to get out of it in a hurry. We forget about this when we talk about the good old days of baseball. We forget about some of the bad stuff that happens, and you will not find this anywhere else unless you go to the newspapers yourself and start poking around and start feeling a little bit curious about this or that. As for Harry Pattee, he was out for 2 weeks. He came back a little bit, and then he injured his knee. The knee injury, right? Think about like running backs in football. They say you're done. Harry Pattee was done. He wasn't able to really come back much in 1908. He had a few times where he would play, but I mean, he wasn't 100%. 1909 in spring training, he's back in Brooklyn. He looks like he's going to make it in March. And then in late March, early April, the articles come out about he's kind of lazy. He's not doing so well. He never played Major League Baseball again. He ended up over in Rochester where he did pretty well. He helped them win pennants in whatever league they were in 1909, 1910. By 1912, he was out of professional baseball and was coaching over at Brown University, which he did for over a decade. That's the story about Harry Pattee. Now, if you know your baseball cards, there's a really nice-looking card for him from the T206 set. And so Harry Pattee has become immortal in that sense because of T206, which is one of the few baseball card sets that will always have a market. There will always be people who want to purchase that. There are people younger than me who like to buy those cards with their extra money and like to put them on display in their houses, right? If you're going to invest in anything for the long term, that's what you need to look at. Look at T206, look at 52 Topps, look at 53 Bowman Color, you look at the real sets that are absolutely iconic. If you're wasting your money on something new and you're buying the whatever $20,000 Topps case, whatever they call that stuff, you're an idiot. You should be putting it in T206. That's a completely different topic, right? But when you look through your T206 set or you look through the book about it and you'll see Harry Pattee, don't just think about the stuff that it says in that little biographical blurb. I want you to think about what happened at Washington Park and those crazy explosions that were happening at the factories across the way. We've come a long way, guys, and I think actually, despite all the problems we have in the game, I think we're doing all right. I think we can live with it. Talk to you later. Bye.